All right, so today we're diving into some pretty heavy stuff.
Hmm.
We're talking about a guy who went from like full-on atheist
Okay.
to spiritual guru practically overnight.
Wow.
Like seriously, this guy went from there's no way a God exists to building his own entire belief system around his experience with psychosis.
That's intense.
It really is. And he wrote it all down too, called it Nui Warheit, which basically translates to new truth.
So he had this incredibly powerful experience and felt compelled to try to make sense of it.
Exactly, and it really highlights how intense psychosis can be.
Absolutely. It
Right.
can be completely life-altering, not just for the person experiencing it, but for everyone around them.
No kidding. And the thing is, this guy, he had zero religious upbringing.
Really?
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like his parents were trying to, like, I don't know, build up his immunity to it or something. And then, bam, first psychotic episode hits, and suddenly he's not just spiritual, he's convinced there's a God.
It's like his brain hit fast forward on a crash course in philosophy and religion all at once.
That's a great way to put it. He actually calls it his spiritual boot camp.
Spiritual boot camp.
Yeah, wild.
That's
man.
one way to describe it.
But here's the thing, he even compares some of his most intense mystical experiences to being on high doses of LSD or magic mushrooms.
Wow.
Except he wasn't on any drugs. This was all happening organically within his own mind.
That's fascinating. Well, the biological mechanisms are different. Both psychosis and psychedelic experiences can trigger these altered states of consciousness.
Right.
And those altered states, they can really shake up how someone views spirituality and philosophy. It's like the mind is capable of generating these incredibly powerful experiences with or without external substances.
It's like his brain became its own chemistry lab.
Anyway, yeah.
And it wasn't just a fleeting trip either. He carried these spiritual echoes with him long after the initial episode.
It makes sense, though. It's like
Yeah.
even after the most intense part of psychosis fades, the brain still has to grapple with what it went through.
So it's not like you just snap back to normal and it's over.
Right. It's more like you're changed by the experience.
And for him, those changes manifested in these super vivid mystical dreams. He was having them constantly, almost every night.
It's like the mind trying to process something that just doesn't fit into its normal categories. Yeah.
So, okay, we've got this guy. He's had this intense experience and it's completely reshaped his worldview. But what did that worldview actually look like? What were the core tenets of this whole New Warheit thing he wrote?
Well, at the core of his new truth was this idea that God and the devil weren't just figures of good and evil, but these like opposing forces that basically powered the universe.
Okay, so not your typical Sunday school lesson then.
Not even close. He saw God as this creative force and the devil as a destructive force, and argued that you need both for anything to exist at all.
Interesting. So it's like a cosmic balancing act.
Exactly. You can see these hints of dualism in his thinking, which is this concept of opposing forces that pops up in a lot of religious and philosophical traditions.
Right, like yin and yang.
Exactly. Or in Zoroastrianism, you have Ahura Mazda, the god of light and goodness. And he's locked in this eternal struggle with Angramenyu, who represents darkness and evil.
So where do humans fit into this whole cosmic dance-off? Are we on Team God or Team Devil according to his New Warheit?
He believed humans were inherently spiritual beings connected to this cosmic drama.
Okay, so we're not just bystanders.
No. And here's where it gets really interesting. He was convinced that both God and the devil could actually communicate with us directly.
Wait, directly. Like, pick up the phone and give us a call.
Hold on, because it gets even wilder. He believed this communication was happening through quantum phenomena in our brains.
Quantum phenomena. Okay, now we're getting really out there.
I know, right? He specifically pointed to these tiny structures called microtubules that exist within our neurons.
Microtubules. I'm pretty sure I slept through that day in biology class.
Basically, he saw them as like a bridge between the spiritual and physical realms.
So it's like our brains are hardwired for spiritual communication.
That was his belief. It shows how psychosis can intertwine with these complex intellectual or scientific concepts.
Right, so he's not just saying, I feel God. He's trying to explain it using science.
Exactly.
But it doesn't stop there, right? He had some pretty interesting ideas about God's personality, too. What else did he cook up in this New Warheit?
Well, he describes God as being terrified of losing humans to the devil.
Really? Even though God's all-powerful?
Yeah, he still saw God as having these very human-like anxieties and fears. It's like, even in the face of the divine, we can't help but project our own emotions onto it.
That's a really interesting point. It's like, even if you completely rebuild your understanding of God, you still see him through the lens of your own experiences.
Precisely. And that's something you see throughout his writing, this constant interplay between human emotion, and these grand cosmic ideas.
So what else? Did he have any other big ideas about the
Oh,
universe?
yeah. He believed there are multiple universes out there, some where evolution is possible, some where it isn't. And he believed that we just happen to exist in one where it all worked out.
So we're living in the good timeline.
That's how he saw
Lucky us, I guess.
it.
It's enough to make your head spin thinking about all the different possibilities out there.
Right. But that's the kind of thinking you do when you're trying to find your place in all of existence.
Which I guess is what he was trying to do.
Exactly. And that search for meaning, that search for understanding it, led him down some pretty unexpected paths.
And that's where we're going to have to leave it for now. But we'll dive into those twists and turns after the break.
And, it's that search for meaning and understanding that really takes his story in some wild directions.
You're telling me this is where he goes from having a unique perspective to, well, he becomes convinced that he's the reincarnation of Nietzsche.
Wow.
But not just any Nietzsche, he's like Nietzsche 2.0, back with a mission and everything.
It's interesting how often the idea of reincarnation comes up in these kinds of stories.
It's like he's found the ultimate answer to the question, what's it all about?
Right. It provides this sense of continuity of purpose that extends beyond a single lifetime, which can be really comforting for some people, especially in the context of psychosis, where the world can feel so chaotic and unpredictable.
It's like finding a framework for understanding your place in a much larger story.
Exactly. And in his case, that story involved taking on the mantle of one of history's most influential thinkers.
And not just taking on the mantle, he's convinced that Nietzsche left clues for him. Hidden messages within his writings about the true nature of the universe, like some kind of philosophical treasure map.
It's not uncommon for people experiencing psychosis to find these layers of personal meaning in everyday things, even if those meanings aren't necessarily there to an outside observer.
So instead of just reading Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he's thinking Nietzsche is speaking directly to him through the text.
Exactly. And it's not just him feeling like Nietzsche is speaking to him. He believes he has a unique ability to decipher these hidden messages that only he, as Nietzsche reincarnated, can fully understand.
So he's Nietzsche reincarnated, he's got this secret mission to decode the universe. What exactly is he supposed to do with all this newfound knowledge? What's the end game here?
Well, he sees himself as this kind of middle Christ figure, guiding humanity toward a higher state of enlightenment.
Middle Christ. That's a new one. So he's not just a philosopher or a prophet. He's like a spiritual bridge between humanity and enlightenment.
That's how he sees it.
Yeah.
And his mission is to wake everyone up to this higher level of consciousness.
Okay, so how is he going to do that? How does he plan on bringing the whole world on board with his, let's just say, unique brand of spirituality?
He actually lays out a pretty specific plan. It involves a combination of mindfulness, meditation, regular doses of cannabis, and of course, a deep dive into the works of Nietzsche.
Sounds like my kind of weekend.
Right? Sign me up.
But it can't be all meditation and chill vibes, right? There's got to be some conflict, some pushback. I mean, not everyone's going to be down with enlightenment, are they?
You're absolutely right. He anticipates resistance, even predicts a kind of spiritual war, an Armageddon, where the enlightened will clash with those who cling to ignorance.
It's like a cosmic battle for the fate of humanity, with him leading the charge for Team Enlightenment.
Exactly. And this isn't just a war of ideas either. He's talking about different levels of reality, different spiritual planes of existence that he believes he could actually travel between.
Okay, so now we're not just dealing with philosophical differences. We're talking about entirely different dimensions.
Exactly. He describes this whole system of spiritual levels that he claims he can physically move between everything from the depths of hell, populated by demons, to the heights of heaven where angels reside.
He's got the whole cosmic real estate market covered.
It's a fascinating look at how someone experiencing psychosis might interpret their own internal experiences.
So these different spiritual realms aren't something he invented. They're drawn from existing religious and mythological traditions.
Exactly. These ideas have been around for centuries. It's not surprising that someone in a heightened state of consciousness might latch onto them as a way to explain what they're going through.
So he's drawing on these existing frameworks, but then filtering them through the lens of his own psychosis to create something entirely new.
Exactly. And for him, this wasn't just some abstract philosophical concept. It was his lived reality.
And it sounds like he wasn't just passively observing these different realms either. He believed he had some control over his movement between them.
Absolutely. He believed your spiritual state dictated where you ended up on this cosmic ladder. Good deeds, positive thoughts, they elevated you, lifted you toward heaven. But negative thoughts, bad actions, they drag you down closer to hell.
So it's like a cosmic karma system where your thoughts and actions directly determine your spiritual altitude.
That's a good way to put it. But remember, this is all filtered through his psychosis.
Right. So this idea of spiritual levels and personal responsibility for your actions, it's all part of how he's trying to make sense of his experience.
Exactly. And it can be a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it might motivate him to act in positive ways, but on the other hand, it could lead to intense guilt and anxiety if he feels like he's not living up to his own spiritual standards.
Yeah, that's a lot of pressure to put on yourself, especially when you're already dealing with so much internally.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
And unfortunately for him, that balance is about to be thrown way off.
Because this is where Kanan comes into the picture, right? The mysterious woman at the heart of his Noirheit.
Kanan isn't just some random woman. She becomes this central, almost mythical figure in his belief system.
She's like the Mary Magdalene to his middle Christ.
In a way,
Yeah.
he sees her as his soulmate, representing this divine feminine energy that he needs to connect with to fulfill his mission.
Wow. Okay, so we've got reincarnation, spiritual warfare, multiple dimensions, and now a love story for the ages.
That's a lot, I know.
It's like he's writing the script for the most epic movie never made.
And like any good love story, this one is full of longing, hope, and ultimately heartbreak.
Because here's the thing, he's not just passively waiting for this cosmic soulmate to show up. He's actively trying to manifest their union.
He's convinced they're communicating telepathically, leaving her messages to meet at specific times and places, buying gifts he thinks she'll like, decorating his apartment for her arrival.
That's both incredibly romantic and kind of heartbreaking. I mean, talk about putting your heart on the line.
But it speaks to how real this was for him, how powerful these delusions can be.
Exactly. And in a way, she represents this anchor for him, a beacon of hope in the midst of all this chaos and uncertainty.
But she never shows up, does she?
No, Kanan remains elusive, a figment of his imagination. And as you can imagine, that rejection, it hits him hard.
It's like his carefully constructed reality starts to crumble around him.
Exactly. And that's when things take a truly dark turn.
So he's poured his heart and soul into this belief system, this mission, this vision of a future with Kanan, and it's all slipping away. What happens to someone in that position, someone already teetering on the edge of reality? It's a recipe for disaster, honestly. The human mind, it craves meaning, it seeks patterns, and when those patterns dissolve, when the ground beneath you crumbles, it can be incredibly destabilizing, especially for someone already navigating the complexities of psychosis.
It's like he's built his own universe, his own set of rules, and suddenly the laws of physics no longer apply. So what does he do? How does he try to regain control?
Well, he decides if he's going to fix this, if he's going to get back on track with his mission, he needs to confront the root of the problem. And in his mind, the source of all this chaos, all this pain and rejection, it all points back to one thing: the devil.
Okay, so we're going from cosmic love story to supernatural showdown. He's going to confront the devil head on. Does he at least have a battle plan?
Well, his idea of confrontation is about as unorthodox as you might expect. He decides that to defeat the devil, he needs to fully embrace hell.
Embrace hell. That sounds counterintuitive, even dangerous.
It is, both literally and figuratively. He believes that by intentionally engaging in negative thoughts, destructive behaviors, he can shift his spiritual state, force a confrontation, almost like he's trying to game the system, hack his own psychosis.
So instead of running from the darkness, he's running towards it, thinking he can somehow bend it to his will.
Exactly. And as you can imagine, this strategy backfires spectacularly.
Yeah, I was going to say, diving headfirst into the abyss rarely ends well.
It's a recipe for disaster. And unfortunately, that's exactly what unfolds. He starts acting increasingly erratic, convinced he's receiving messages from God, instructions on how to purify himself, how to overcome this demonic obstacle. And this leads to some very real-world consequences, culminating in him setting his apartment on fire.
He set his apartment on fire.
Yes. Thankfully, his roommates were unharmed. They were able to escape. But it was a terrifying and destructive act, fueled by his delusions. He flees the apartment, convinced he's carrying out some divine mission, and ends up wandering the city, lost in this terrifying world of paranoia and delusion.
It's heartbreaking, really. You can almost feel the fear, the desperation in his words as he describes this period. He talks about being hunted, persecuted, the world literally crumbling around him. It's a stark reminder that psychosis isn't always about grandiose delusions and mystical experiences. It can be terrifying, isolating, and incredibly dangerous.
Absolutely. And what's particularly poignant is that during this time, he throws away his copy of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. It's like he's trying to sever his connection to the very beliefs that Han had, for a time, given him a sense of purpose and meaning.
It's as if his compass is completely shattered, and now he's just adrift in this sea of his own distorted perceptions. So how does he find his way back? How does he escape this terrifying reality he's trapped in?
It's a long and difficult process. He ends up being hospitalized after a series of increasingly erratic and dangerous behaviors. And even then, even within the structured environment of the hospital, his delusions persist. He's talking to doctors, trying to explain his new Wahrheit, convinced that he's on this grand mission to save humanity. He can't even answer basic questions because they seem so trivial, so meaningless compared to the cosmic drama unfolding in his mind.
He's lost in his own world, unable to connect with the reality around him. It's hard to imagine how terrifying and isolating that must have been.
It's a testament to how all-consuming these experiences can be, how they can completely warp a person's sense of self and reality. But even in the midst of all this chaos, there are glimmers of hope. He describes this moment, this small victory, where he's talking to a doctor, and he's trying to remember how to spell his own name. It seems like such an insignificant detail, but in that moment, it represents a huge step forward.
It's like a tiny crack in the wall of his delusion, a reminder that somewhere beneath all the noise and confusion, a part of him still recognizes the world as it is.
Exactly. And those small victories, they pave the way for bigger breakthroughs. The medication starts to take effect, the fog of psychosis begins to lift, and slowly he begins to reconnect with the world around him. He starts to question his delusions, to see the flaws in his own thinking, and to piece together a more accurate understanding of what he's been through.
It's not a sudden or dramatic transformation. It's a gradual process of healing, of reclaiming his sense of self, and learning to navigate the world without the framework of his neue Wahrheit.
It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, our capacity for growth and change, even in the face of immense adversity. And what's truly inspiring is that he doesn't just recover, he uses his experience to help others. He shares his story, becomes an advocate for mental health awareness, and dedicates himself to helping others who are struggling with similar challenges.
So what can we take away from all of this? What can we learn from this man's journey into the depths of psychosis and back?
I think it reminds us that the human mind is an incredibly complex and powerful thing. It can create beautiful things, terrifying things, and everything in between. And sometimes those worlds collide, and we're left trying to make sense of the wreckage.
It's a story that challenges us to look beyond the labels, beyond the diagnoses, and to see the individual, the human being at the heart of the experience. To remember that mental illness is not a sign of weakness or a character flaw, but a complex condition that can profoundly impact how a person experiences the world.
It's a story that encourages us to approach these experiences with empathy, compassion, and a willingness to listen without judgment. Because ultimately, it's through sharing our stories, even the most painful and confusing ones, that we connect with each other, challenge our own assumptions, and deepen our understanding of what it means to be human.